Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Natalie Standiford's new novel, Astrid Sees All, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors like Natalie and Rob, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so truly appreciative of it. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Natalie Standiford for the launch of her new novel, Astrid Sees All. Natalie was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and studied Russian language and literature at Brown University and in the former Soviet Union. She has written many books for children and teens, including How to Say Goodbye in Robot, The Secret Tree, and Confessions of the Sullivan Sisters. Her book reviews and essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She lives with her husband in New York City, where she occasionally plays bass in rock bands with other restless writers. Joining Natalie in conversation is Rob Sheffield. Rob is a writer for Rolling Stone, where he has covered music, TV, and pop culture since 1997. He is the author of the national bestsellers Love is a Mixtape, Love and Loss, One Song at a Time, and Talking to Girls About Duran Duran, One Young Man's Quest for True Love and a Cooler Haircut. His other books include Turnaround Bright Eyes, The Rituals of Love and Karaoke, On Bowie, and Dreaming the Beatles, the love story of one band and the whole world. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Natalie and Rob to the stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Natalie, congratulations on this amazing book.
Ooh, I just did a screenshot. Thank you.
I'm going to do one too. Screenshot, everybody. Screenshot interlude. Perfect. This book I love so much. Thank you so much for writing it, and congratulations on making it happen.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you for reading it, and thank you for being here to be my event partner and talk to me.
And it's beautiful doing it at the Strand, since the streets of downtown New York City are such a major character in Astrid Sees All.
True. Yes. It all takes place downtown. Well, actually, it starts on the Upper West Side and then moves downtown with the main character, Phoebe Hayes, just graduated from college. It's 1984. And first she moved to the Upper West Side in this apartment with lots of roommates. But then she decides to move to the East Village with her best friend, Carmen. And the East Village was like a lot more decayed than, there were like whole blocks that were rubble, abandoned buildings, squatters, more crime than there is now. But it was sort of like an underworld, like a bohemia. And Phoebe and Carmen are seeking thrills there and exploring the club scene and the art scene and sort of looking for their dark sides. And they're having a really good time until things start to fall apart. And then their loyalty is tested. So it's kind of like a friendship story, coming of age, and it's sex, drugs, and new wave music.
Everything a book should have.
Especially the new wave music.
Especially, yes, but it all kind of feeds into each other. You're going to read a little bit of the book?
Yes. I had a little trouble. I decided to try to read something that I haven't read yet. So this is from partway into the book. Phoebe, the main character, has gone on a date with an older man named Ivan. And since that date, he hasn't called. So this is driving her crazy. So Carmen, her best friend, decides to take her to the movies at Lincoln Plaza Cinemas to distract her, because this is still when she's living on the Upper West Side. It's actually mildly spoilery, but I'm not going to worry about that. I don't really believe in spoilers. If a book is too suspenseful, I look to the end to see what's going to happen because I can't tolerate too much suspense. So anyway, but don't worry, it's not too spoilery. Carmen took me to see Danton, set during the French Revolution's reign of terror. We were on a Gerard Depardieu kick. That was depressing, I said afterward, and long. Robespierre was such a prick. Carmen hunched forward into her Gerard Depardieu impression. Peuple de France, she rasped, imitating Danton at his trial near the end of the movie when he was losing his voice. Only you has the right to judge me. Peuple de France, I echoed hoarsely. You sound like Marlon Brando in The Godfather, Carmen said. Across the street, the Metropolitan Opera House glowed like a crystal jewel box. Let's go over there and see if we can find anyone as depressed as we are, I said. Yes, what are the bourgeois pigs up to? People milled around the fountain in Lincoln Plaza under a fat October moon. Nobody looks depressed, Carmen said. I'm not depressed anymore either. We walked along the lip of the fountain. I showed Carmen the little hops and leaps I used to do on the balance beam as a child. I want to go to the opera sometime, I said. How much do tickets cost? A lot. Carmen started singing, Oh, Theodora, don't spit on the flora, use a cuspadora, that's what it's for. Where'd you learn that? I asked. It's from my opera. What do you mean, your opera? Carmen, dummy. I reached into the fountain and splashed a little water at her. Do you know this one? I faced the opera house and belted out, Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit. I played Elmer Fudd, serenading Carmen. Oh, Brunhilde, you're so lovely. Yes, I know it. I can't help it, Carmen sang. The doors of the opera house burst open and people streamed out, flooding the plaza with tuxes and diamonds and evening gowns and chatter. The lips of the fountain became our stage, with some of the opera goers cheering us on. Oh, Brunhilde, be my wife. A man in a long coat caught my eye. He winked, and I realized with a start that it was Ivan, escorting a tall woman whose golden hair was twisted into a poof high on top of her head. I nudged Carmen. It's him. Where? He'd grown a goatee. The woman with him tugged a mink stole close around her shoulders while the hem of her dress swept the ground. With the blonde over there. Ivan held my eyes for half a second. Then he pressed a hand to the small of the woman's back as the crowd carried them to the street. Carmen took my hand and we bowed to the 5 people applauding us. The plaza emptied quickly, the crowd's energy draining away. We hopped off the ledge and started walking home. Do you think she's his girlfriend? Who knows? She can't be his girlfriend. If he has a girlfriend that gorgeous, what's he doing playing around with me? Please, she bumped me with her hip. You may not have a mink stole, but you have your charms. We paused at Broadway and 79th, the neon harp of Dublin House blinking, tap room, tap room. Beer? Carmen nodded in the direction of the bar. Beer. We ordered at the bar and settled into a booth. No wonder he hasn't called. She's tall and elegant and about 1,000 times more beautiful than me. Would you stop? Carmen blew beer foam at me. He goes to Don Giovanni at the Met while I stand outside singing Elmer Fudd. It's so embarrassing. I daubed the beer foam off my forehead with a cocktail napkin. She's got to be his girlfriend, right? Maybe she's his wife. His wife? I hadn't thought of that. That's impossible. He wasn't wearing a ring. So, married. It had never occurred to me. When I got home after midnight, my roommates were asleep. The phone rang. I went into the hall to get it. I'd forgotten how cute you are, Ivan said, until I saw you tonight. He wanted to see me again to take me to dinner. I said yes. Then I called Carmen. Maybe I should have said no, I said. What about the blonde woman? You don't know who she is, Carmen said. That's his problem. If I don't go, I'll never find out what would have happened if I went, I said. That's right. You have to go so you can tell me all about it. I didn't warn you that I was going to be doing Bugs Bunny.
That was so good. Oh my gosh, your musical, your opera animation like incarnation is just an inspiration. It's such a great scene. It really it captures like so much of the romance in that book, and I think that's why people are responding to this book so much, and it's resonating with people so much, is that there's something really just romantic about these young women having these adventures in the city at a time that in retrospect seems like a time of freedom.
Yeah, that's true. It's as people keep saying, before cell phones.
Right?
You're starting to realize what a ball and chain thing can be. Yeah.
Even that scene you just read, they would have had their phones out and been looking for that woman, like on his Instagram or something like that.
That's true.
But so something about this book is it captures, that sort of romance of this time when, people just, nobody in this book is checking their phones. They seem very in the moment by comparison.
And I think people were more mysterious because then you could meet someone, you couldn't go Google them. The best you could do is look them up in the phone book and see, and see maybe where they lived, but you couldn't really find out anything about them. So in a way that makes it an easier time to write about. You can keep the mystery going.
People have such a romantic vision of downtown New York in the 80s. Despite how different it was, is it funny for you as someone who was there that those of us who weren't there look at that time now and reading this book and thinking, oh God, I should have been there. I should have been there at that time.
I don't know about funny, but I guess the thing about what happens in the book and the atmosphere of the book is sometimes I feel like, oh, I should have been there too. Because I've heightened it. And I've also, I was there. I lived on Avenue A in the mid-1980s, between 9th and 10th Street, which is where Phoebe and Carmen live. Because I thought, with locations, if there's no reason to change it, I like to use places that I know because then it's easy for me to describe them and make them vivid. But the thing is, when I lived there, I had a day job. I was an editorial assistant at Random House in children's books, and I had to get up in the morning, and I had all these neighbors, particularly these two young women who seemed so old to me because I was 22 and they were 28, but they were so glamorous. One of them worked as a door person at Area, and they both were dress designers, and they had a shop in the first floor of our building called Batislavia that I was afraid to go into because it was so cool. It was painted with clouds everywhere, and they had all these crazy clothes like Rambo's wife ball gown, and but like I would be getting ready to go to bed at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and I would hear, a motorcycle pull up yelling, Pilar, Pilar, calling my neighbor, and she would run out wearing some incredible outfit and jump on the back of his motorcycle, like just on her way out for the evening. And I was so jealous. So when I was writing this novel, at first, Phoebe was an editorial assistant like me, but and then I thought, why should I put her through? I loved that job. But like, why should she miss everything like the way I felt like I did? I did go to clubs and stuff, and I did do fun things, but I wasn't as wild or as bold as Phoebe. So I do kind of wish I could go back and be older, just like everyone else, I guess.
Yeah, so we all wish that go back to our 20s and be bolder and braver and wiser at the same time.
Right.
But also just the place that you evoke and the time, because that phase of New York history seems so so distant from now. Even to think of, that downtown environment, the streets the same, but so changed from now.
It's true. Like, I would go to Avenue B, but in the daytime, or I did go to 8BC, which was this incredibly cool club on A Street between B and C. That block, there was nothing on that block except the club, which I think might have been illegal. I don't think they had licenses or anything. It was just this abandoned building that they put a club in, and it was all like broken glass and rubble. And yeah, it was kind of scary to go to C or D back then, and sometimes scary to go through Tompkins Square Park. But there was so much creativity. Like, there were galleries popping up everywhere, and people just dressed like they tried to be as outrageous and wild as they could. And the club there's a club in the novel called Plutonium, which is inspired by Area, which didn't last long. I think only 3 years, maybe.
Huh.
But it was the most amazing club. It was impossible to get in, although I did manage to get in a few times. But they would redecorate it for a different theme, as I have in the novel, but in every 6 weeks. And they would send out an invitation for a new launch with every redecoration, which would be, the theme would be suburbia or martyrdom or red or, all kinds of things like that. And they would send some wild invitation to the cool people who were invited to the opening, like, maybe a capsule that said, drop me in water. And then you would drop it in water and it would blow up into a sponge invitation. They had cooler ideas than that. But there was so much creativity just flowing. It was really amazing time when you look back on it.
It seems that way now. It seems wild and free. It's funny, like a movie that we rewatch at least once a year in this apartment is Desperately Seeking Susan. And it's funny how that for so many of us, I was in high school when that movie came out, and that it formed such a vision of what New York looked like. You watch it now and it's like a different planet, like.
I love that movie.
I love that movie. The scene where like the cab is going down Avenue A and it looks like the surface of Mars or something. It's completely different from going down that street now.
It's so dark and deserted in places, and the way that Rosanna Arquette's character dresses when she's living there, and she has that was one thing that kind of inspired me to have Phoebe gets a job in the nightclub as a fortune teller, and in Desperately Seeking Susan, Rosanna Arquette is a magician's assistant, and it's just like this. To me, that seems like magical that you could have that for your job, and maybe you don't make that much money, but it's enough to get by, or maybe you're staying on Aidan Quinn's futon or something.
Right.
But when you go to work, you go to this crazy club and work as a magician's assistant in a little tutu with a bird in a cage, and
pretty idyllic. I mean, but it has to be weird on some level that for like so many of us who weren't there, that we see that as such a idyllic and almost utopian sort of New York vision.
Yeah, I know, because it really wasn't utopia. You could get mugged pretty routinely. I was never mugged, but it seems like everybody else was. And there was always this danger of getting mugged. And also people's apartments were always being broken into, and car windows were always being smashed. And I think the worst thing about that time in New York was the car alarms. Did that still happen once you moved here?
It was gone by the 2000s, yeah.
Ugh. Like somebody would touch somebody's car and the alarm would go off, and it would go all night. Sometimes people would throw eggs at the car, but that didn't stop the alarm. Somehow that got fixed.
The clubs, it's funny that you were talking about plutonium and how people assume that it's palladium.
Right.
They assume it's danceteria or something. It's funny that these are such mythical names now.
Yeah, danceteria I went to once with a friend of mine that I'd gone to high school with. He moved to New York and started dating this guy who owned a club called Xenon. And so he had this in everywhere. And he would just call me up on a weekend and say, let's go to danceteria. So I would go with him, and he would complain about how all the girls were wearing these like kind of Aunt Jemima hairdo rags, like Madonna was too at that time, because that's the scene she came out of. And it had all these floors. You could dance one kind of dance on one floor and another kind of dance on another floor, and you could get something to eat on another floor. Yeah, there were a lot of good nightclubs.
One of the ones that just announced is closing, the Pyramid Club. Is that one that figures in your New York memories from that time?
I'm so sad that it's closing. I sort of couldn't believe it still was around after all this time. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned it. I think it does get mentioned in the book, but I don't think anyone actually goes there. But I went there all the time because I lived down the street from it. And that club wasn't hard to get into. And it was always open, and it was more casual, and it was so fun. Did you ever go there?
Yeah.
Are you sad? It's sad.
Yes. Yeah. Fun place.
Yeah.
But like, area that you mentioned was only around for a few years, but in a way, it's such a major character in the novel because, it's like this, romantic zone that the characters go into.
Yeah, I think to me, in a way, the East Village or downtown Manhattan was kind of a self-contained world back then. People used to say they never went below 14th Street if they were uptown people, or they never went above 14th Street if they were downtown people. And it was this borderline that, you would cross, but it meant something to cross it. And actually, downtown people always said they got nosebleeds if they went above 14th Street. But so I wanted to capture that feeling of like, it's this self-contained world. And then even within that self-contained world, there's this club that's a self-contained world. So it's also celebrities and people go there. So it's this place of opportunity, like this idea that you don't know what could happen when you go there or who you're going to meet. Or that makes me think of another movie, 50, is it called? What's the one with Chloe Sevigny? Is it 54? Where she works? I think it's called something else. But I love that movie too, because they go to Studio 54 all the time, and that becomes like their playground, and where all the drama happens, where they meet people, where bad things happen, where, so I think for people who were regular at clubs, it was like that for them. One thing I liked about that movie, though, is they worked in publishing too, just like I did. That's
interesting that's an aspect that you kept the characters protected from. But something I love about this book, and I think another thing that that it's part of why people are responding to it, it's really resonating with people, is that ultimately so much of it comes down to the friendship between these women, and as you said, the way that the loyalty gets tested, and that's such a universal kind of story.
Yeah. Yeah, Carmen and Phoebe meet in college, where Phoebe is from Baltimore like me, and Baltimore is a wonderful place. It's also kind of a self-contained world that I've written about a lot in my children's books and YA novels, with a very particular kind of people who I love that, to me, they're these eccentric people. But when I started working on this book, I realized, the East Village was like that too. There were people like this character, Bix, who was a little bit inspired by Rocket's Red Glare. Do you know who he was? He was a character actor, a very big fat guy who had drug problems, but he was, sweet and kind of the mayor of the East Village and always friendly and knew everybody.
He's in Stranger Than Paradise.
Yes, he plays a bookie or something.
Yeah, in the card game, yes.
He's in the card game, yeah. He was in all those kind of downtown indie films, and I think he might be in. Well, anyway, so he's a kind of character. Actually, you could picture a version of him living in Baltimore. But anyway, Phoebe is from Baltimore, and Baltimore is a place where, in certain circles, it seems like everybody's father is a doctor. Like it's just everybody's father was a doctor. That's the industry of upper middle class Baltimore. So then when she goes to college and she meets these people whose parents were, a famous pop star or a movie director or a composer, and especially people from New York, she's so impressed by them, and they just seem to know something that she doesn't know. And also there's a character in her dorm who she lived in Manhattan on the Upper West Side and worked in a bakery the summer before college. And a movie star came in every day to ask her out. And she said no. And Phoebe can't believe she would say no to a movie star, but she's just so blasé because she lives in New York, and it seems like, stuff like that happens all the time to people who live in New York. So she can't wait to live in New York. And Carmen is from New York. Her father is a famous composer, and her mother's a former actress. And she grew up on Sutton Place and went to Dalton. So she has that. She's from that world. And so Phoebe idolizes her in a way. But then, so there's a transactional quality to the friendship in a way. But Carmen wants things from Phoebe too. So that's why their relationship kind of goes back and forth as they're giving and taking advantage of each other, but also being really good to each other sometimes. Sometimes when Phoebe's sick and needs her, Carmen is there and really helps. So I think, young women and maybe men often have these relationships that are complicated like that. Like you love them and you hate them. You're so mad at them. They're very passionate.
Yeah, it's something I guess like that leads to my next question about continuity with your earlier books, that although this is very different from other novels you've written, it seems like that's a theme in your books, is these like complicated but sustaining friendships between women.
Except How to Say Goodbye in Robot is a boy and a girl who have the complicated friendship.
That book is so sad. So sad. I love that book. It seems like this book, although it's different in so many ways, there's a lot of continuity with the other novels that you've written over the years.
Well, in a way, I did think when I thought about what do I want to write next, and I've written books set in elementary school and middle school and high school, and one book even set in college. So just felt like, well, post-college felt next. It seems like I need to have a good space of time between myself and the period I'm writing about. Because right after college, I didn't have the perspective to write about it. And lots of people do write insightfully about the time, the age that they are and the time they're living in. And I envy that. I seem to need a distance to do it. So that's why it's set in the 80s. There's the distance.
That's useful. But there are elements of the, like very like complicated and poignant friendship in How to Say Goodbye in Robot. Like it also like reminded me of the Sullivan Sisters in a way, that, that sort of like that bond sort of tested over time.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure where that comes from. And it never really occurred to me that was a theme that I write about a lot. So thank you for pointing it out to me.
But these characters, they're so vivid and tangible, partly because like, even though they're in this place that seems like very like exotic in terms of the time and place, but very sort of like universal conflicts that they have going on inside and between them.
Yeah, But don't you think that is true? I think that was one thing when I was in my 20s and living in the East Village, and I would see people like my neighbors who were so glamorous. I was intimidated by them because I guess I didn't believe that they had the same kinds of insecurities and doubts and feelings that I had. But now that I'm older, of course, I understand that they did, and everybody does. And so, I guess I wanted to emphasize that a little bit. Like, they're doing all these things that seem really cool, but what is cool? That's nothing but a costume or an attitude, I guess.
True. Yes. But that's funny. Like, it's interesting what you said about sort of Phoebe bringing that Baltimore-ness like with her. When she's in New York. That's an interesting aspect of her character.
Yeah, it's Baltimore is not the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's not Kansas, yeah. But she feels provincial compared to people who grew up in New York. And I think also she grew up fairly sheltered, and she's sort of lived this cushioned life, and she feels compelled to break out of that. And that was a big reason that I wanted to write about her and that age and her going into an underworld the way she does, because I think I felt that way too. And I think it's something that people need to go through in their late teens or their 20s, kind of testing the limits of their dark side or what's out in the world, and going into a kind of underworld and maybe conquering it or seeing what happens when you do that. Who's there? What's going on there? And how do you feel about it? And how does it affect you? I thought a little bit about Persephone, the myth of Persephone. She's this little girl. But when I thought of this, I thought, oh, that is...
the Persephone how? Like...
Well, so Persephone's a little girl, and she's picking flowers with her mother, and Hades, the god of the underworld, kidnaps her and takes her to the underworld. And she doesn't want to go, and she's not happy there at first. And her mother is really upset and searching everywhere for her. But by the time she leaves, she becomes the queen of the underworld. And eventually there's like a deal made that she can come back for half the year. And her mother, who is the goddess of the seasons and food, says, like, when Persephone comes back, it'll be summer. And when she has to go back to the underworld for half the year, that'll be winter. And when I thought about that myth, I thought, when I was young, nobody kidnapped me and took me to the underworld, but I wanted to go to the underworld. I wanted to take myself there. I felt like I needed to go there. And I think it's a good thing if you don't go too far. I mean, you have to be careful what you do. And some people can be damaged by too much experimenting with various things. But you can gain so much confidence and figure out who you are and become who you really are. And then you're sort of like the queen. When you come back, you're an adult.
I love that. I love it. Well, one of the heartbreaking details of Persephone's story is it's a pomegranate seed, right? She eats a pomegranate seed, and because she eats a pomegranate seed when she's in the underworld, that means she belongs there and can never fully escape and has to go back. And that's an aspect, like what you said about that sort of going to the underworld and experimenting, is like you don't totally know whether you're going to make it all the way back or not. But that's part of, like, it seems like that's part of the excitement for Phoebe, definitely, in this book.
Yeah, I know, just one teeny little pomegranate seed. But but I think I twisted the myth a little bit, because I know the way the myth is usually told, it's her mother's, so upset. And I do have Phoebe's mother. Phoebe moved to these villages without telling her mother where she is, and because she's afraid her mother's going to try to make her come home. And so her mother, we don't see much of this, but I think she is looking for her and desperate, like Persephone's mother. And well, I won't say anymore, but I have a really bad way of telling too much. But I don't know. I guess I thought, maybe that story, it is about archetypes. It's a feminine archetype. Maybe it's not really so tragic, what happens to Persephone if she does come back and she's matured and she's gone through something that we have to go through, even if it's not easy.
I love that. But partly like because these characters have each other and difficult and troubled and tested though the friendship is, it's really, touching bond between them. And that's part of why I think, I'm sure a lot of different people have said this to you, but I started the book and then just like couldn't stop it. I read it all in one night because like I needed to know what happened. And I think a lot of people do. Like I think a lot of people have that experience with this book, and I think it's probably because that friendship is so compelling that they're not going through this alone, and you want to know if they like at least have a chance of holding on to each other with all that they're going through together.
Yeah, that's a question.
It's a question. It's not to be answered today, but it's kind of like it's an element of the story that just sort of just drove me instantly through this book. I couldn't just like dip a toe in it. It was like really, really, really amazing.
Oh, thank you, Rob.
We have a few questions.
Oh, good.
Are you good to grapple with questions?
I am. Also, if you, Rob, or anybody, there's one other aspect we didn't talk about in the book, which is the fortune telling, where Phoebe has a box of movie ticket stubs that she's saved since childhood, and she uses them as tarot cards, and she tells people's fortunes. And so I didn't have that foresight, but I made a box full of movie titles.
Love that.
So if anybody wants me to answer a question and tell their fortune, I can do it. I can pull out 3 movie titles at random and see what it will say and try to answer the question with them. So, or I would also be happy to answer normal questions.
or maybe both.
Or both.
Just, I guess, like to set the tone, may I ask for a fortune?
Please do.
What does the future hold for me?
Well, I think I need a little more specific.
All right.
Is there a particular thing that you're wondering about, or?
Sure. What I guess what will the immediate future bring for me?
Well, can I ask you, are you thinking about like a work thing or a love thing or a family thing or something else, or no, you just want to know? All right, we'll just
now I'm too fearful to get specific, like, so you can tell I'm afraid of my fortune.
All right, we'll see what it says. We'll find out something. All right, so I'm going to pull out 3 titles. First one is, I don't know if I should have this in here, the Zapruder film.
Wow. Okay.
Which is, that film of the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
I don't know if that's even like a movie.
I will witness something distinctive.
Right. But you'll witness it. You won't be the victim.
Hopefully.
La Bamba.
La Bamba.
So there will be music.
Music, yes. Festive music.
You will dance La Bamba.
Yo soy Capitan.
Huh. And that last one is Return of the Secaucus 7.
Whoa.
So I think that means you're going to New Jersey.
Wow. So I will either get assassinated or be in a plane crash or go to New Jersey. Thank you for this fortune.
No, I mean, I'm sure there's a better way of interpreting that.
I love all 3 of those films. Thank you.
Maybe it's Return of the Secaucus 7 is like a reunion. I think maybe you'll have a reunion with old friends. Friends who you experienced a trauma with, or maybe you went dancing with.
I love that. we have a question here. An excellent question from Cynthia. What made you choose the year 1984 in particular? It sure was quite a year for music.
Ooh, that's true. I guess I chose it because I graduated from college in 1983 and moved to New York and moved to the East Village in 1984. And so I just had Phoebe on the same trajectory so that I would know when I was writing about, you know, what restaurant and what shop and what gallery was around in the neighborhood when Phoebe's there. If it was there when I was there, I'd know it was okay. Like my memories would match what Phoebe sees because everything changed so fast. It was one of the tricky things in copy editing this book is the copy editor would always say, this wasn't there until, you know, December of 1984. And so it just partly was, I wanted it to be in the 80s and it made it easier for me to have Phoebe's history match mine.
I love that, but also, I mean, you capture that musical moment so intensely when the punk and post-punk and new wave things are becoming like very, you know, dance oriented, and all these sort of musical boundaries are falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that music, and I made a playlist while I was working on the book. When I can't listen to music when I'm writing, but when I would take breaks, I would put on the playlist and dance around, or I would get a song in my head, like the New Order song, Your Silent Face, was just always in my head because I had a memory associated with it from when I lived on Avenue A. And it was a Friday night. I came home from work and people were coming over for a poker party. So I was getting the apartment ready and I'd had Your Silent Face in my head all day. So I just took my Power, Corruption, and Lies album, put it on the turntable, played that song and danced around, cleaning up for the party. It's a very ordinary moment, but it really haunted me while I was writing because it's so, you know, 22-year-old in New York City getting on a Friday night, you know. So anyway, there's a playlist to go with the book that you can see on Spotify. If you search for Astrid Sees All, you can see any song that's mentioned in the book I put in the playlist and other songs that inspired me. And also there's Astrid Sees All Part 2 because I couldn't stop putting songs on. So it's like 5 hours long.
I'm so excited for this.
But my editor said she played it while she was cleaning the house and it's really good for that.
All right. Got a question here from my wonderful and brilliant friend, Caitlin Whitliff, on the West Coast, who's very much missed on the East Coast. Caitlin's question is, as I've aged, I've definitely realized how critical female friendships are to my mental survival. Is that something that you learned later in life? And why do you think these female friendships are so important for us who identify as women?
I think I did learn it later in life. I always had female friends, but as a girl, I guess I took it for granted because who else are you going to be friends with? You know, I mean, I had male friends too, but you know, it's natural for girls to be friends with other girls. And actually, right around in my late 30s was a moment when like female friendship really became something I appreciated. And I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, Rob, but some of my friends and I started a band, an all-female band, except for the drummer, who was a really nice guy, called Ruffian, mostly so that we could be together and so that instead of just complaining about our love lives and stuff, we could write songs about them and play them and practice them. And it became like this, it's a band, but it's also this unit of friends. And we still, like if we're all going out to dinner, we say it's a Ruffian dinner. Like we still refer to ourselves as Ruffian. And it's so comforting and so wonderful to have this group that I have this history with and be in a band is almost like being siblings. It's intense history that you have with someone if you've been in a band with them, and you do become close in a certain way. So I do, now that I'm older, appreciate it so much. It's like you can count on them the way you can count on sisters. It's very good.
It's definitely a beautiful thing for me to witness as a longtime Ruffian fan. I still swear, Phantom Limb is a jam and a half. Your bass line on that is just inspirational.
Oh God!
But that's a fascinating theme of the book as well. Got a great question here from Liza. Did you find you had a different approach for writing a novel for adults than you did in your prior books? And what do you think the difference in writing YA and adult novels is?
In some ways it's the same, because like I was talking about how I wrote about Baltimore in my children's books and middle grade novels, and a lot of setting is really important to me, and that world, I loved the idea of taking this place that I loved and knew and sort of making it my Baltimore. You know, there's Ann Tyler's Baltimore, and there's Barry Levinson's Baltimore, and there's John Waters' Baltimore, and there's my Baltimore. And it took me a while to get up the courage to do that with New York, because New York has been written about a lot more. But when I thought about the East Village as a self-contained place full of weirdos like Baltimore, then I felt like I could do it. And so in that sense, it was similar. But it took me a lot longer to write this book, partly because I didn't know exactly what story I wanted to tell. And I would write a draft, and then it wasn't working, and rewrite it. And sadly, that this appears to be my process. It's very labor intensive. It takes me a long time to figure out what to write. And I felt like plotting maybe was a little bit less straightforward when I'm for this book than it was for my younger books, partly because kids don't have as much backstory as adults. Even a young adult has a past that you have to fit into the novel somewhere and figure out what it was. And for most of my child protagonists, I was writing about them experiencing something for the first time, and there really wasn't a lot of backstory or anything like that. So I guess that's the difference. It's so hard to remember what the process was like. I think I haven't actually been through childbirth, but I've heard people say it's like childbirth, like you, after it's over, you have this beautiful baby and you forget everything that you just went through. And I think that is true for writing books too. Once it's over, it's like, oh, I don't know how this happened, but here it is.
Yep, a very apt comparison, I think. People always say, like, if you could remember what it was like, you'd never do it again. So it's good that you keep forgetting, because it's.
Yeah, I do remember thinking, I'm never going to put myself through this again. I am already working on a new book. Like I'm going to do it again. But I remember thinking, like, how could I survive this another 5 years like this?
I mean, this is a question that kind of ties into that with the specific aspect of this story. This question comes from Kristen. Did the Carmen-Phoebe dynamic need a lot of revisions to get right, or was it working from the beginning? And also, how is it to get to know your own characters and translate them to the page?
No, the Carmen and Phoebe dynamic definitely developed over drafts and drafts and drafts. And early drafts, their friendship wasn't even the main part of the story. It took me a while to get to the point where I realized that that was the main relationship. There were like boyfriends who got cut and all kinds of things. And what was the other part of the question?
Well, whether the Phoebe dynamic, like the Phoebe and Carmen dynamic, how much revision and evolution that took to get right, but also what it was like, I guess, to get to know these two people and to translate them to the page.
That was fun in a way, because with Phoebe, I started with she had a lot of me in her at first. And eventually, the more I wrote and rewrote her, the less like me she became, and the more of an independent person she became. And Carmen, too, was kind of a composite of different friends I've had. And eventually, she became her own person and sort of gelled into this unique character. And that felt good. Once I saw them kind of take off and become their own people, I realized, okay, now it's finally working. The more things are tied to exactly how I remember something, the less I feel like it's working. Like, for me anyway, I feel like when things feel fictional, then it's working.
I have a question from Lizzie. Are books in my future? This is a fortune question.
Oh. Books? Any particular kind of books? Lizzie, I don't know if she can answer this. Let's see.
Are books in Lizzie's future?
I would, without even looking, I would imagine so. But do you mean writing books? Well, I'll just see. Let's see what happens. Slacker. Okay. So sometimes you can think the first one is the past, and the second one is sort of like how things are now, and the third one is the future. So let's say you were a slacker. Hail the conquering hero. That's right now. If you're the Lizzie I think you are, I don't know if you are my cousin Lizzie or not, but if you are my cousin Lizzie, you are the conquering mother hero of 2 toddlers. And then I can see why maybe books aren't in your present right now. The future. Dodsworth.
I don't know. Lizzie added that she means rare books.
Rare books. Oh, that's a different Lizzie.
Lizzie, but still a conquering hero who might also be a slacker and a Dodsworth. But I don't know Dodsworth, so I don't know that.
Dodsworth, 1936. I did see it. It's but I don't remember it very well. It's an old movie about a man who goes to Europe. He's an American Yahoo, and he goes to Europe. Maybe he's looking for rare books. I don't know. Well, you can see how difficult this method of fortune telling can be, depending on what we pull out.
Absolutely.
But I think Hail the Conquering Hero means yes, books are in your future, Lizzie.
Interesting question from Cecil Castellucci. You've touched on the New York of the time, but it seems like New York City is a character in itself in the book. Can you talk about using place in the book?
Yes. For me, like a place is everything. Like a story can only this story, or this story could only happen in this place because of the alchemical magic of who's there and what's happening and the history of it and all that. And so the place determines a lot of what happens, a lot of who's there. It's almost like it's the god of the story, the place that, determines what the world is going to be and who's going to be there and what they're going to do. I hope that answers the question. I really believe in setting and place, and like to try to make it come alive as much as I can.
That comes across. There's a similar question from another city, from Seattle. As cities continue to get taken over by corporations, I'm a noob to Seattle, but that's what I'm seeing. How do we create and foster art scenes in creative communities?
Wow. This is not something I'm an expert in, and I wish I knew the answer to that, because I think, of course, art communities are vital to cities, and cities aren't interesting unless they are lively and allowed to thrive. It seems like different cities have different problems. Like New York's problem seems to be too much money, whereas Baltimore's problem is not enough money. But in some ways, Baltimore has a really thriving music scene and art scene right now because it still has that. It's still affordable to live there without, having to make a lot of money, and it has a little bit of that sense of edge that New York has lost a little bit because there's just so much money here, and real estate is such a big deal here. Seems like real estate is, if doctors are medicine is the main industry of Baltimore, real estate is the main industry of New York, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, totally. Interesting question here. Natalie, can you say how you thought of the celebrities you portray in the book and the drug use?
How I thought of them?
Yes.
Well, John Kennedy Jr. is one celebrity who's in the book, and I went to college with him, and I remember the effect that his presence had on freshman college students, just him being there. And I thought it was really interesting, what a person like that, having a person like that in your midst can do to change the chemistry of a group. And so that's one reason why I included him. And then some of the celebrities are made up, but then it's just people who I thought of as iconic of the time, or maybe people that I saw around, like Grace Jones was amazing, just an amazing icon. And so there's something so impressive about her. And also to me, even though she's still around now and she hasn't really changed, but something about her fierceness and her style just seemed so perfect for nightclubs and the time. Or Andy Warhol, of course, was ubiquitous then. The other people it was just who seemed to represent the feeling of the time and place. And the drug use, that's the dark side of the story. And it wouldn't be a good story, I don't think, if people were just going to nightclubs and dancing and nothing bad ever happened. And heroin in particular is such a dangerous drug, and there were a lot of junkies then, and it was part of the landscape in a way. You would see people nodding off. You'd see needles and blood and stuff on the sidewalks in the mornings when you left your apartment. And junkies would do things like buzz you in the middle of the night, hoping you'd let them in to your building. So it was a lot of things existed because junkies existed. Like in the book, there's a bar that has blue light in the bathroom, because if you didn't have in a blue light, a junkie can't find their vein because it's blue.
Wow.
You don't have a blue light, they might go in there and stay in there the whole night and hog the bathroom, and that's a problem. So they would put blue lights in to keep them from doing that. So it creates the atmosphere, the drug use.
I guess we got time for one more question. This is an excellent question to end on from Kristen Kishore. This is a fortune question.
Oh, okay.
Very, very to the point. Kristen asks, I'm taking a vacation day tomorrow. What should I do?
Oh, okay, Kristen. That's a good question. I hope I don't get a story of menstruation again. I've gotten that twice.
But the Zapruder film is done, so everything.
So I should put it back. Okay, meet me in St. Louis. You should take a trolley ride or go to St. Louis.
a very distraught, emotional experience across the miles.
The treasure of the Sierra Madre. go on a treasure hunt, look for gold, or, ooh, a tree grows in Brooklyn. I know that you live in the Boston area, but you might want to come down to Brooklyn because the trees are looking beautiful right now.
The tree literally grows in Brooklyn. Absolutely. Which is set in North Brooklyn.
With all the treasure and everything.
Perfect 3-movie fortune to end the evening on.
Yeah, thank you both for such a wonderful event, and fun discussion. It was thoroughly enjoyed. I wish I could get my fortune told, but we will do that another time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, Rob, thank you, Sabir. Thank you to the Strand.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Phoebe and Carmen, for being part of our lives now. You know, like, I'm always checking in on them in my mind. So thank you for writing this amazing book.
Thank you.
And I guess as a final note to anyone in our audience who hasn't purchased the book, if you're watching on Crowdcast, there's a green button which says purchase, and it'll come with a signed book plate. And if you're watching via Facebook, you can click on the link in the video description. So with that note, thank you everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming, and thanks for all your questions, everyone.